everyone. Can I please have your attention? We're going to start the meeting. I don't know if he's coming. Let's see. Can you serve the queue? Yeah. I'll take care of parliamentary procedure. All right, so the first order of business is Union Constitution. I don't want to know. We need to talk about one amendment to it. So how it reads now is pertaining to the Judicial Board. The Judicial Board shall decide whether to review a case brought before it for a decision. The Judicial Board may decline to review a case. That's how it stands right now. What it should read, this is kind of what we wanted it to be. The Judicial Board Chair shall decide whether to review a case brought before the Judicial Board for a decision. So instead of a decision going to the whole board itself, it would go to the chair. I believe that's how it currently operates. We just want to make sure the Union Constitution reflects that. But since this is an actual change that has merit to it, it has to be discussed in Senate and voted upon instead of just a grammatical mistake. So I don't have a written motion because we're motioning to amend what we passed 2 weeks ago, which is the original motion. So would anyone like to motion to amend that to include this?
I motion to amend.
Second. With the changes I mentioned?
Yes.
Is there any discussion for that?
Just one question.
Yes.
Since I can't remember the entire. So it's just saying that Judicial Board Chair has the authority to, I can't remember the rest of what you said.
So any cases that a student wants to appeal, the Judicial Board Chair can decide whether or not the Judicial Board itself will hear it. So instead of the whole board meeting on it, it would just be the chair itself. Now, if the chair declines the case, the student can then bring it to the review board, so it's not the end of the road technically. But right now, that's how it currently operates. And so I want the wording in the Constitution to reflect that. Any other discussion points? All those in favor? All those opposed? Are you opposed or raising a candy? Sorry. All right, motion passes.
4 against, abstentions.
All right, that was the easy part of the night. Now, we're going to move to excuse policy, and with that, I'm going to turn over to Kyle.
All right. So, as many of you are aware, actually, let's wait for the projector to work. Can you get that?
Yeah.
You have to click and just arrow key it. Well, look at that. Okay. So, Chuck, you guys ready?
Yeah, all right, everyone, please focus your attention on Kyle.
All right, so as many of you are aware, the Student Life Committee has been working on revising academic attendance and excuse policy in conjunction with the faculty departments and the Department of Student Life. Today, we're here with the final revisions of this policy change. We've submitted them already to the Student Experience Office. Our vote today is to endorse these changes as well as to endorse the final development of the new display to go on the website outlining the procedure for the process. So a little background information as to the need, as to why we're doing this project. First and foremost, ambiguity in the current policy. If you look at the current policy for class attendance and examinations in the catalog, there's nothing really detailing the modern process for attaining an academic excuse. By outlining it clearly, we'll be able to provide more guarantees for students, as well as remove most confusion that may result from an unclear process. Second, lack of flexibility for students, especially in the case of unforeseen circumstances. Current policy requires students to be at Academy Hall when requesting an excuse. It also requires students to present documentation in all cases if they're going to be excused. Both of these requirements are very rigid and don't really provide wiggle room for that student who might wake up sick and need an excuse that day, or who might not be able to make it to Academy Hall due to a debilitating circumstance. Third, the health center wants to get out of the business of writing excuses completely. Those of you who were here for Dr. Lawrence's presentation at the beginning of the year might recall this. The health center's priority is on treatment, not on excusal, and requiring a note from the medical director in any circumstance to attain an excused absence for medical reasons can create a conflict of interest. Fourth, we have a lack of student input into the final decision. This is a rare case, but it's affected a lot of students academic performances when they've been given an excuse for a legitimate reason, but their professors decided, no, I will not accept that, and that's kind of been the end of the story. This doesn't come up often. Faculty members tend to have a very good relationship with students, but in creating some kind of student input into that final decision, we can give a greater guarantee that all sides are properly represented in the process. And finally, in doing so, in promoting more dialogue between the students and the faculty, we want to prioritize the student-faculty relationship. We want to emphasize that professors can issue excuses without an official note, and also that in any case, the dialogue should be maintained between the student and their primary instructor. So, history of our project work, as I might have mentioned, it originated from our work with the Health Center. We collected student feedback regarding the Health Center last year and early last semester, and we became aware of impending policy revisions that were in work by the Office of Student Experience and some of the faculty departments. As the Student Senate, we can offer a student perspective. So I talked with the Dean of Students and requested permission to engage in drafting a new policy in conjunction with each of these departments. As that permission was granted, we underwent extensive administrative negotiation. I'm going to give you a list of our liaisons on the next slide. And once the policy was more finalized, we were asked to write the website revision as well. The website revision, which you can also see in the packet, details what will be displayed when you visit the Student Experience website /policy/EA, I believe it is. This is what's going to be displayed for students, so if a student's looking up how to get an absence, the process is clearly lined out for them. Our final revisions and our project were submitted to Student Experience about 3 weeks ago, I want to say, and we've been told that that the ideas we've proposed will be implemented. However, we've also been told that the final version may differ slightly from what we're doing here. So once again, we're endorsing the ideas and endorsing the project that's been made, or the progress that's been made, and we're also supporting our draft and emphasizing this to be the end result of the discussions that we've had. You good, Joe? So our liaisons, Office of Student Experience, we talked to the Dean of Students and worked primarily with Luis Trespaz, the Dean and Assistant VP of Retention. We've spoken with each of the heads of the various schools and with some professors as well. We met with Dr. Gerhardt, VP of the Faculty Senate, as well as Dr. Sams, VP of Student Life, Dr. Ajela, Provost of the Institute, and Dr. Lawrence, of course, the Medical Director with the Health Center. So a rundown on what the policy is and what it does. The old policy, again, if you're seeking an excuse, you have to visit Academy Hall. With documentation, your excuse will be considered at the dean's discretion. Without documentation, you cannot be excused. If the dean does not issue an excuse, again, you're not excused. If they do, it's passed to the professor, who then must accept it for you to be formally excused from whatever class and have to go through the makeup work. You good, Joe? So under the new policy, this looks more complicated, but that's because it's more flexible. There are more avenues a student can take when they need to get out of class. A student seeking excuses can contact their relevant faculty first, if at all possible. If the faculty says yes, they don't have to go through the process. That's it right there. Again, it's emphasizing the student-faculty relationship before anything else and kind of leaving that as a stopgap. If they can't reach the faculty, or if the faculty says they need an official note, then they can either visit Academy Hall as they could before, or they can submit a request online. If they have visited Academy Hall and don't have documentation proving their reason of absence, or if they submit one online, the excuse will be considered at the dean's discretion. You can now get an excuse without documentation. It's just up to the dean whether to issue it. If they have documentation, now there's a guarantee that you will be given an excuse note, and that'll be sent to your professors. If the professor accepts, you're excused, but if the professor denies, the student can contact Student Experience, and there will be a discussion, basically. They'll facilitate a conversation between all three parties so that everyone's voice is heard equally in the final decision. Joe? So the effect of the changes, a lot of this has already been said, so I'm going to kind of run through it. The process is much clearer. It's very laid out both in the policy and even more so on the website. There is a stronger faculty relationship with open dialogue between the student and professor at multiple locations. There's more flexibility for unforeseen circumstances. Once again, if you can't produce documentation, you can still be excused. If you can produce documentation, you'll be guaranteed that student experience will advocate for you. There's flexibility in how you submit that excuse. You can submit one online via their online form on the student experience site. And there's a suggested grade guideline for excuse denial. What this means, previously, if a professor wanted to deny an excuse in any circumstance, they could do so. The Student Experience Office cannot legislate over the faculty, but by putting in place a suggested guideline, kind of setting a course's minimum standard as when an excuse can be accepted versus denied, it's giving a little more of a guarantee to students than they've had in the past. And finally, there's student input into any final decision that is made. As I've said before, there will be a discussion that happens between the student experience dean, and whichever faculty may disagree with an issued excuse, just to make sure everyone's heard. So this paragraph, you can see this in the draft itself. I'm not going to outright read it, but more or less, as I said before, the final version that's included in the catalog may differ slightly from our revisions, according to Dean Trespaz. We haven't been given that version yet. And as the Student Senate's role is, of course, not to set administrative policy, just to propose changes, what we're doing here is simply formalizing our acceptance of the negotiation process that's occurred so far. We're acknowledging the cooperation and all of the progress that's been made, and supporting the Senate's ability to work with similar processes in the future and have a say in this and other administrative policies that may come up down the road. Just to be clear, we've kind of put our foot in the door with this policy. This is something the Senate's never had a say in before. So having been able to enter these negotiations this year is a bit of a breakthrough. If this comes up again, there's a precedent for us to have a say and give student input. And if other policies like this come up, we have that history of proven negotiation to say, hey, we can work with you on this. So it's a bit of a step forward for us as a body. So I just want to quickly thank the Student Life Committee. A lot of you are in the committee, so I'm not going to list all of you, but I want to especially thank Joe. As a first-year senator, he chaired the subcommittee responsible for this project and really put in a great effort. I want to thank Chuck, the Grand Marshal. We talked on several occasions throughout the year, and his input was essential in making this happen, as well as Dr. Lawrence, the Medical Director, Dr. Sands in the Student Life Department, and Dr. Hajela and the faculty representatives, all of whom were very open and very responsive to all our negotiation throughout the process.
Okay. I'll read the motion, and then we can move to discussion and questions. So the Rensselaer Union, 44th Student Senate. Whereas the Student Senate recognizes student need for a clear policy outlining the modern procedure for obtaining an excused absence. Whereas students and faculty have expressed the need for flexibility, supporting the rights of faculty members and providing student input into the excuse process. Whereas the Student Senate promotes strengthened bonds of trust, acknowledges the primacy of student-faculty relationship, and supports the importance of maintaining integrity throughout the academic process. Whereas the Student Senate acknowledges the collaborative efforts of students, faculty, and staff in updating relevant policy and procedure in accordance with expressed need, endorses the revision of the academic attendance and examinations, an updated description of the excused absence policy prepared for the Student Experience website, as negotiated by the Senate Student Life Committee, representatives of the Rensselaer Faculty and Division of Student Life. So moved by the Student Life Committee, presented by Kyle. All right. So moving to discussion points. Does anyone have anything they'd like to talk about with the actual update itself?
Are we doing Q or just open?
We'll keep it open for now.
Okay, so the page that says the revision, class attendance, and examinations,
Yes.
it goes on the second page, the paragraph about a religious circumstance where you would miss classes.
Mm-hmm.
There was a difference between the old one and the new one, that the old one stated regarding absence from classes or laboratories, but this one only says classes. Does that mean that labs and test blocks are excluded? Why was that change made?
We weren't aware of any change that was made in that regard. I'll bring it up to Dean Louis Trespaz. Basically, this paragraph is outside our control. It's an institute policy to set aside religious occasions on a separate level. If there's any case in which it seems religious circumstances are not being exempt, we'll make sure that the students in that circumstance are advocated for.
Chances are it's most likely an oversight.
Yeah,
But
I agree with that.
that's wording that I also would like to see included, so I imagine Kyle and his committee will get in contact and make sure that's updated. But
Definitely.
That's something I imagine they just forgot to put in, because a religious exception pretty much will get you excused from everything, so.
It's almost beyond institute policy. It's almost at the level of law.
Other questions?
So say if the student senate were to implement this policy, like, or pass it or whatever you guys do today, what's in between that would get this policy, like, as RPI? You know what I mean? Like, what's the steps to take before it gets implemented?
Well, just to be clear again, the Senate does not implement Rensselaer policy. What we do is offer a student voice in any policy changes that are made. This policy has already been submitted to Dean Trespaz and the Student Experience Office, and they're already working to put it into the catalog. By voting to endorse it today, we're showing our support and really pushing to take a step forward where the Student Senate can negotiate if this policy ever comes up again, and students can continue to have a voice in changes that are made. So we're basically voicing our support for the changes that are being made. Ultimately, the decision for changes is at the administrative level. What we can do, of course, is check in and make sure that they happen, you know, as the final catalog is decided before next semester.
Yeah, just to go off of that, like Kyle said, we can't create Rensselaer policy. We can create policies for ourselves to govern. But in terms of this is more of a Senate seeing a problem and starting the communication with the Institute so that they can fix it. So by updating it, we're finishing the loop that we started essentially. It was like, hey, we saw this problem, we'd like you to fix it, we'd like to help you fix it, and we're happy with the changes that we worked on together. That's essentially what's happening with this.
Anything else?
Other questions?
Welcome to the floor, Jacob.
I just have one more question.
Yeah.
You mentioned like that there's going to be a website with a simplified version of the policy. What exactly are you going to put that flow chart up, or what do you plan on?
The website's detailed in the report that went out to the Student Life Committee as well as the entire Student Senate, so check it out there. Yeah, slide down. Shoshana?
The process for sending in excuses online, what part of the student experience will deal with that? Like, what administrator will look at that regularly? Like, is
So,
there a time lapse?
they already have a process for submitting policy feedback or requests via their website. That same process is going to be used to process those kind of excuse requests. They'll be forwarded to the relevant class deans who would be looking at them anyways.
Other questions? Concerns? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor? Keep them up. Keep them up. Okay, all those opposed? Motion passes 18-0.
So just before we move on, a final comment on that religious note. As I said, that's a separate issue that's decided at the institute level, but given that you've brought it up, we'll make sure that we figure out the reasoning behind it.
All right, so moving down the agenda, we're going to Judicial Board Vice Chair appointment. So the motion reads, the Rensselaer Union 44th Student Senate confirms the Judicial Board Chair's appointment of Orlando Hernandez to the position of Vice Chair effective immediately. So moved by Greg and seconded by Peter. So earlier this semester, I believe we approved Orlando to the board as a regular member. Correct. Would one of you like to speak about Orlando moving to this position?
I just wanted to appoint Orlando to vice chair just because the position should exist. There was some rush to get people in to the J board just because of a situation that arose last year of the J board being basically not existing. But the vice chair should exist just in case I have to recuse myself from any case or I can't make it to any case. The vice chair will basically serves in my stead. So Orlando's been in has as much case experience as I do. I believe it's 4 disciplinary cases. So I think he's very qualified for this position.
Any questions? Michael?
Besides serving or being the chair when you're not able to, is there any other role that the vice chair has?
That's pretty much exactly what it is. It's just if the chair cannot, it's if for some odd reason I was removed from the board, you know.
Other questions? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Yo, if you write me up now, this.
This motion passes 18-0.
We're gonna change that for next meeting.
All right, the next motion, we're moving to Senate bylaws. This will be one of 2 changes. The other one will probably be the next meeting. So this motion reads, the RPI Student Senate, whereas the Grand Marshal is qualified to appoint appropriate officers of the Student Senate, whereas the most qualified members of the Student Senate are not necessarily senators, resolves the following amendment to the Student Senate bylaws. Article 3, Officers, Section 2. All officers of the Senate shall be nominated by the Grand Marshal and confirmed by 2/3 vote of the Senate. So what this basically does, all members of the Senate, or all officers, don't have to be a senator with the exception of one, and that's the vice chair. If this motion is passed, that means I could, well, not me, the next Grand Marshal could appoint a vice chair that's not necessarily a senator. This motion also does a second thing, which I actually just noticed. It's raising the limit to 2/3 vote for all committee chairs.
That doesn't change the number.
It does. All committee chairs are majority vote. Only the vice chair is 2/3. That can be amended because it's moved by Shoshana, but that's how it currently stands.
I didn't want to change the number.
Okay. Well, you can amend that, but let's move to the vice chair discussion point specifically, meaning that they don't have to be a senator. Comments, anything?
Well, actually, I had a question clarifying that. The bylaws, as I read them, are a little unclear about the distinction between officers of the Senate and committee chairs. Because right now, the only committee chair that is technically an officer of the Senate and has to be confirmed by 2/3 vote is the Rules and Elections chair. So, so maybe, I don't know what to do about that. It might seem like a loaded discussions, but maybe we should reword the motion to only deal with the vice chair thing for now. Just an idea.
Okay. But in terms of, that's a very good point. In terms of the vice chair not being a senator, because that's really the main topic here. The voting parts we can work out pretty easily, I think. But what does everyone think about that? Paul?
I think that we should keep the vice chair as the one position that it's mandatory for a nominated officer to be a senator, simply because as the vice chair is the officer who would be presiding in the event that the Grand Marshal isn't there. I don't think it really makes sense for somebody who's just nominated by the Grand Marshal and not voted on by anybody in the student body other than 20 people to be the presiding officer of the Senate for potentially an indefinite period of time, rather than, and sort of that also creates the implication that that person is more qualified than all of the senators who are seated in the room who are elected by the student body.
Carla, I believe, is next on the queue.
Yeah, be aware that the only order of business for a vice chair who's stepping in as acting Grand Marshal is to call a meeting at which the next Grand Marshal will be elected. That is his only responsibility in that position. He may be appointed as the next Grand Marshal at that meeting, but only if he's a voting senator. The secession procedure requires you to be a voting member of the Senate if you're going to take on the Grand Marshal role following a secession meeting. So the only role of that vice chair in that situation would be to preside over the meeting at which the next GM is picked, a position for which he's not eligible.
Oh, Michael.
I was just gonna say something along those lines, and also like the president of the U.S., like he chooses his own cabinet. Like we don't vote on the
The
members.
vice
like
president.
Besides the vice president, which is a different role than the vice chair of the Senate. Like the cabinet, like the secretaries, all that is appointed by the president. So it's a little bit different. I think.
I'm next on the queue. I just wanted to clarify something Kyle mentioned. That's not the only responsibility of a vice chair in the event of the absence of a grand marshal or, removal. The vice chair actually assumes all the duties of grand marshal without holding the office until a new grand marshal can be appointed. That can be a long time if, say, the Senate weren't able to get quorum to hold a meeting to execute the succession procedures. So, not really as part of an opinion, but just something to keep in mind.
And just
Hold on. Paul.
I wasn't referring to a meeting where we're talking about who's succeeding, when somebody's being named to succeed to the grand marshalship. It's sort of like in the event that Chuck isn't at a meeting and the meeting was called, Greg would be the person running it since Greg is the vice chair. And it's sort of the idea that the person who would be running a meeting at a given point in time, or the most senior officer on the floor, I feel should be somebody who is voted on by not just the Senate. And also in terms of the order of precedence or who's running things, if the president is gone, it goes to the vice president, voted upon, speaker of the House, voted upon, president pro tempore of the Senate, voted upon, before the secretary of state nominated.
Sean.
So this motion would just add flexibility to the GM's cabinet. Obviously, a lot of our cabinet positions this year are senators, and I don't think that would necessarily change. This would open it up, say, if a GM wanted to pick someone who couldn't be elected for whatever reason. Like if you imagine a scenario where they thought that their GM candidate that they were running against was also very qualified. If they're running for GM but lost and they couldn't be GM, but that doesn't mean they couldn't step in and be vice chair and be equally qualified. Like there are reasons people don't win elections, and just because you don't win an election doesn't mean you aren't qualified for a position.
Greg.
I was just going to ask on the subject of the vice chair's duties when the grand marshal is no longer present. Does what you say hold true for both the new and old constitutions, or just the new one, or just the old?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
What you just said, enumerating more or less the vice chair's duties in the absence of a grand marshal.
It doesn't matter old to new because the new constitution and old both say that if they're removed, the Senate bylaws dictate how
That's done.
it's done. Thank you. Charles.
One thing, according to our current bylaws, the vice chair, even if they're not a senator, so say if I was just removed right now, if Greg wasn't a senator, no matter what, Greg can't become the grand marshal because he's not a voting member of the Senate. So just to address one concern, if someone had that, no matter what, they can according to our bylaws as they stand. But another point, I originally thought in the beginning of the year, 2 years ago, that the vice chair has to be a senator. And I maintained that position while I was the vice chair for 2 GMs. But in all reality, you just need someone to be your chief of staff. Whether they're a senator or not, in my opinion, doesn't really matter. Greg's been doing a great job going around to different committees. The GM just needs someone who they can trust to go around to these different committees or to handle any work that they give them. Now that changes from year to year. This year, I've been around Senate for quite a while, so Greg is experienced actually, so this example doesn't apply, but I don't necessarily need someone who is experienced with Senate, but that's not always the case. I think it does open up an avenue of flexibility that would be refreshing to really pick your own cabinet that will determine whether or not your administration is successful or not. So I think there is some merit, I actually think there's a lot of merit to this amendment personally.
Next on, I just wanted to ask, did you say that even if, so say you removed Greg, couldn't become GM
if he wasn't a voting member, I changed this. If he wasn't a voting member, he couldn't become vice chair or couldn't become grand marshal.
Right, yeah, okay. Q's empty.
Any other questions, comments? Seeing none, we'll move to vote. A yes for this would mean the vice chair can be anyone. They don't have to be a senator. So, well, they have to be a student. Okay, fair. So they don't necessarily have to be a senator. That's a yes. Yes.
Can you read it again?
Yes. The Archivy Student Senate. Whereas the Grand Marshal is qualified to appoint appropriate officers of the Student Senate, whereas the most qualified members of the Student Senate are not necessarily senators, resolves the following amendment to the Student Senate bylaws. Article 3, Officers, Section 2. All officers of the Senate shall be nominated by the Grand Marshal and confirmed by 2/3 vote of the Senate. So moved by Shoshana, seconded by Marcus.
Two quick questions on, you wrote I'm just curious as to the impetus for writing the second whereas the most qualified members are not. I'm just wondering, what were your thoughts?
So the original phrasing was exactly that amendment plus the phrase, all members of the cabinet except for the vice chair may not necessarily be senators.
Okay, I got
So I was using the original phrasing, arguing against that phrase.
Okay.
That was from the bylaws as they are now.
Second thing, thank you for using resolves in the statement of action because that's how it works.
You're welcome.
And that's why Frank is the parliamentarian. All right. For the motion, any other questions? All right. All those in favor? All those opposed? This motion passes 16-0, or 16-2.
Sorry, calling the vote no longer.
Okay, next item on the agenda, end of year dinner. So I got a decent amount of responses back, not the whole Senate, however, the best time, I think 6 people can't make it, which is awful. So what I'm gonna do is, I'm gonna expand the dates out farther and try and get this dinner organized, because I want as many people there as possible. So that's gonna change, I'll send out a new one, it's good. Just fill that out as if you didn't fill out the new one, or the one I sent out previously. I'll do approval of minutes last, actually. So I got this email, during GM Week, they're doing a competition called Anything That Floats in the pool. Basically, if you wanna form a team and build some kind of structure from anything, it could be really cheap cardboard just covered in tape, and you have to get it from one end of the pool to the other side, and it has to stay afloat. One person in the float itself. But it's a cool competition we're doing GM Week. I threw it out there. If people want to form a team, I'd be totally open to
I'll
that.
volunteer.
Wait, what can you build it up?
Anything that floats.
Really, anything.
Could you build it out of a boat?
I mean, if you want to spend that much money, it has to fit in a
No,
lane.
someone actually did build a boat. There's a picture of a wooden boat.
I'm saying, could you build it
Yeah,
out?
so people have like really cool makeshift paddles. It's like pretty cool.
I think that'd be against the sport.
That's legal.
Who would be interested in doing something like this? If this isn't a huge commitment, you're just like, if you're kind of interested.
I'll volunteer to go with the boat. I'll do it.
Okay. I'll probably send out a reminder about that. Let's see if we want to build a float or do something fun. Could people pass the minutes back to me? I want to see if there's any changes.
That's good.
Some words were chosen.
Wow. You never called me chumper.
Words I never thought I would.
Alright, so I have 2 changes to the minutes. One was changing the word bill to proposal under Tina's report. I don't see an issue with that. And another one is under Senate communications. Someone crossed out, everyone complained about meeting times. So that's
Why'd they
stricken
cross
from
that
minutes.
out? Why is that crossed out?
That's kind of funny, actually. All right.
No,
So those are the
there
two
was no-
changes made.
I'm sorry.
So, no, all those in favor of the changes? All those opposed? Okay, they pass. All right, with that, we're gonna move to committee and constituent reports. Rules and elections, Tim.
So just a couple of reminders on deadlines. The deadline for submitting your poly profile information to poly is tomorrow. The deadline for submitting your preliminary expense forms is Friday. And by next meeting, I should have a spreadsheet ready so everyone can sign up for this. So that's it.
Okay. Senate Communications, Shoshana.
So if anyone didn't sign the card thanking RPI-TV for their awesome filming of our meetings, can you sign that please? I'm gonna give it to them after the meeting.
All wave at the camera.
Dang it, Tim.
What I said last week is now null and void.
In front of the cage and then.
Gabe, you wanna give a little wave in front of the camera?
Sure. That's gonna make a nice e-card.
All right, Shoshana.
So last week, Communications worked on a summary about the Union Constitution changes that would be available to students at the poll sites when they vote on the changes. That has been finished up and it's now fresh and clean on a new poster board outside the student government suite. As soon as the revision to the amendment passes, then I'll also have copies of the entire document in case people want that too. This week we're going to work on the rest of the documentation for committees and the general body meetings.
Okay. I know John is working with Lester Gerhardt to get the syllabi, or the syllabuses assembled.
Syllabi.
Syllabi. I had it right, okay. So syllabi assembled. So that's what's going on with him. The next report is the Senate Executive Board Liaison, Frank.
So on Saturday, the E-Board voted unanimously to kick the crap out of Senate in Broomball. And then
Exactly, why do we have
Talk. Motion to officially name Frank Avisi and Russell Brown as traitors to the student senate.
I'm just gonna pass that.
I want that next comment from Frank Stricken for the
Anything, actually?
no, there was actually.
Glad we have you on the agenda for this. All right, FSC, Tina.
Alright, this Thursday we're doing our year review, so we're gonna go through all of our projects, pros, cons, recommendations for next year. And we're still waiting to hear back on meetings for the project proposal.
Okay. Student life, Kyle.
As we voted today, the excuse policy revisions we worked on this year have passed. They are being, I went through the whole presentation, I don't need to go through it again. We're going to be voting on the pharmacy proposal and taxi service proposal next week. That's it.
All right, thank you. Web Tech, Gabe.
Hi everyone. This week we worked on updating the elections website. Everything is all set for GM week, so the nominations are coming in and everything. Also, I need to document that process for any future CIOs because there was no documentation when I joined and I kind of messed things up in the fall, but the spring went a lot smoother, so that's good. RSN is going well. I looked into hosting for that and we set up some space, so that will be launched when ready. And last but not least, we fixed the concerto screen down in the West lobby across from Quad. It didn't have a computer because we used the other one for the new screen that we got in the Horseshoe lobby. So yeah, that's all.
Thank you.
Yeah, just a quick question for you. Do you have any idea about whether or not there's going to be a replacement for black and white printers, or if that, like the color printer in the SGS is only going to charge for black and white if you print black and white? Because right now it's charging for color regardless of what you print.
No comment yet.
Okay.
All right. We'll go to IFC now. James.
For each senator is going up for a vote next week.
Oh.
Yeah. That's it.
Do you know anything for Pan Health?
I don't know much.
Okay.
Sorry.
Anything for Pan Health? Anyone know? If not,
Lisa is saying so.
yeah,
I
Lisa
know he
said.
has,
well.
RPS Got Talent tomorrow, and, or I might have mixed it up, and then, they're also doing K-pop sales in West Bobby.
Thank you.
Communication?
I like it.
Oh, yeah, there's one more thing Naomi's doing.
What?
They're doing Iron Chef. Again, they're hosting up with a Circle K, and that's on the April 4th, so that's a thing.
All right. Graduate Council.
Same as last week, we have a meeting coming up with Dr. Sams regarding the class initiative for the graduate body. 2 more events, we have a movie night and a pub games night coming up. That's the end of our semester.
All right. There's really nothing else on the agenda. Is there any old or new business that people have? This is our second to last meeting, so next week is the end. I'm saving all my tears for that meeting. I would ask you to do the same. But it's gonna be a sad moment for all of us, right?
Next week's
Next week's the last meeting.
Is it
It's gonna be 2 hours no matter what.
The big finale.
Well, it's gonna start at 6. It's gonna start at 6 no matter what. All right. Any other business? Otherwise, I'm just gonna close the meeting. All right. Meeting adjourned. Thank you.